Welcome to Statistics. This is Unit 4, Sampling and Experimental Design. This is Lesson 4, What's Wrong with These Surveys? Okay, turn into your packet. Today we're going to be talking about non-response bias, undercoverage, and response bias. These are errors that are in sampling, and they're due to the person that is giving the sample by doing something incorrect, and that it's causing the results to be biased. Okay, so the lesson today is called What's Wrong with These Surveys, and we're going to look at the different samples here. First of all, it says the mayor of Springfield is interested in finding on the average age of the people of the city. So he obtains a list of all the landline telephones in the city. That's the key, the landline telephones. And then contacts them with a simple random sample of 300 people. He uses the data of the sample to estimate the average age of the people in the city. Now, we learned from the Beyonce that the simple random sample is a good way to do it and not just 300 people that he wanted. However, the problem here is that the people without landlines can't be contacted, and that would be considered undercoverage. And also, if your phone rings and you don't want to answer it because you see it caller ID and you don't know who it is and you don't want to answer it, that would be non-response. What non-response is not responding to a survey either because you don't want to or you cannot. For instance, what if they call during the hours you're at work every day? And it's not that you don't want to respond, it's that you can't. And then, of course, the other reason is that you just don't want to answer the phone, so you don't. Both of those are non-response, and they could be for either reason. I think it would be an overestimate of the true mean age of people in Springfield because younger people tend to not have a landline, and they tend to have cell phones. And in our community, the people that have landlines are typically older people. Okay, let's look at this next survey, number 2. The administration at the school wants to know the proportion of students that did not do their homework last night. So they did a simple random sample of 100 students and sent an email to them asking if they did their homework last night. Of the 40 responses, so only 40 people responded out of the 100, 6 of them said they did not, and the rest of them said they did. So 15% said no, and 85% said yes. And if I said 85% of all of the kids at the school did their homework last night, that would not be represented of my population because, as you can see, only 40 responded, 60 did not. So that's non-response. I had 60 people did not. Either the email didn't get to them, they happened to not see it, or they saw it and they didn't want to respond. The second type of bias that could be is what if they lied? They said, I'm not going to tell them I didn't do my homework. I might get in trouble. So they might have just said yes when they actually meant no. Or not meant no, but actually the truth was no. And so response bias is when it potentially could cause somebody to lie about the response. That the question, wording, or somebody influencing them makes you uncomfortable or makes you not want to tell the truth. And so that causes response bias. Because your email is attached to your name and you know who it is, so it wasn't anonymous. And I think this is going to be an underestimate of people that did their homework, or because the students who did respond were proud and they're like, hey, yeah, I did my homework. And so it's an underestimate of those that did not do their homework, but an overestimate of those who did. So because they said, yes, I did my homework, yay, I did my homework, and so they tended to respond. Or you could have gone on the other, if you said overestimate, you're like, well, I think everybody lied, then that would be considered an overestimate. On your test, if you call it an underestimate and you give it a good reasoning like I have here, or if you said an overestimate because you think that most of the students lied, either one's fine as long as you have a reason behind it that makes sense. Okay, and the third survey, Boy Scout Peter wants to know the proportion of people in his neighborhood who would support the Boy Scouts. So he takes a random sample of 30 homes and he is dressed in his uniform. Okay, again, we like the random sample. However, and his question's not bad. Do you support the Boy Scouts? That's not bad. But he's a Boy Scout and he's letting everybody know he's a Boy Scout and he's proudly wearing his uniform. And so therefore, just the fact that he's a little boy or a young man or whatever wearing his uniform kind of makes people feel like, oh, of course I support the Boy Scouts. They don't want to tell them the truth of what they're thinking, and that would be response bias. Remember, response bias is anytime you have a question that potentially can cause some of the respondents to not tell the truth. So you want to try to make your questions and the atmosphere in a way that as many people as you can get feel comfortable to tell the truth. Do you think Peter will over or underestimate the true proportion that support the Boy Scouts? It's probably an overestimate, because people are not going to tend to tell him what he really wants to, what the truth is, which is because they want to tell him what he wants to hear. Okay, the 3 learning targets that we just talked about, the 3 things that we did is undercoverage. That's when people can't be chosen, or they, and so examples like calling landlines, or if I survey homeowners, then the people that are not homeowners are not going to be chosen. The second learning target is non-response. People can't be reached, or they refuse to answer. Again, it's either on the phone one is that they can't be reached because they're working during the time that you're calling them, or they don't own a landline. Those would be can't be reached, refuse to answer. They see it ringing, but they don't recognize the number, so they've refused to answer. And then the third type of learning target that we did was response bias, and that's when you give a response. So notice non-response bias, you don't give a response. But response bias, you give a response, it's just potentially not truthful. So if it's a question, either the interviewer, if I ask you a question, if the principal asks you a question, did you do your homework? Because I'm asking you, you may not tell me the truth, but if your friend asks you, you would more likely tell them the truth, because you realize that I can give consequences and your friend cannot. So, or the wording of the question that we saw, the wording kind of that influences you to agree with them. If I say, hey, I love yellow flowers. Don't you think yellow flowers are the prettiest flowers in the world? Well, you know that I like yellow flowers, and by my question, I'm leading you to say, yes, I want yellow flowers. So anyway, and the last one would be, of course, because people lie. That would be another reason that would be biased. So you want to put them in a comfortable situation that they feel that they can tell you the truth, and they tell you the truth of the question you're asking. Okay, let's do our application questions. One of the most famous flops in history occurred in 1936 to predict the outcome of the election between Republican Alf Landon and Democratic candidate Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The magazine Literary Digest sent over 10 million quote-unquote ballots to its subscribers. They also sent these ballots to registered owners of an automobile or a telephone, which is 2.4 million of the ballots were returned of the 10 million. And a large majority, 57%, favored Landon. And the election turned out to be actually a landslide for Roosevelt, and 61% instead of Landon. It says, explain how undercoverage might have led to this. Well, the survey obviously includes undercoverage because the people that did not have a subscription and that did not own an automobile or a telephone were not sent a ballot. So people that had that were more wealthy tended to be able to get these particular ballot. And these people may have been more likely to support the Democratic candidate, which was the people that did not have the particular things that this ballot was in. So it was an underrepresentation of the sample. We recently saw that in the 2016 election with Trump and Clinton. We saw an overrepresentation of people that said that they liked Clinton, when actuality, the next day, the results came out the opposite. Number 2, explain how non-response might have led to bias in the survey. So 2.4 million of the ballots were returned, which means there was still 7.6 million ballots not returned. So these people who didn't return their ballots could have been more likely to support the other candidate, the Democratic candidate, the Roosevelt, who actually won, but it was definitely underrepresented in the sample. So we don't really know who won, or who would have actually, of those 10 million people, who would have been the majority winner, because we didn't even have the majority of surveys returned. So you would need all but about 5% of them returned to be able to get a good representation of that sample. Number 3, if a magazine followed up with people who didn't return their ballots and was able to obtain responses, would this eliminate bias? So you can't eliminate bias, but you can reduce it, because you can at least reduce the undercoverage. And then following up with people would help eliminate, but you never can eliminate it completely, but you have a greater percentage, and then at least don't want it be undercoverage from the people that did the magazine, but your conclusion could only be about the people that had the magazine, not the entire population of the United States, because you still have undercoverage with the people in the United States that did not buy this magazine. Okay, I hope that helped, and I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and we'll see you next time.